Hey everyone, welcome to the KE Report company update from Snowline Gold, chatting with Scott Berdahl, CEO of Snowline. Company is traded on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol SGD, on the OTCQB under the symbol SNWGF. And we have a lot to talk about here. The company has recently updated its resource on the Rogue project now to almost 9 million ounces, and pretty much all of that, or a lot of that, in the measured and indicated categories. And the company also started this year's drill program of 30,000 meters. So, Scott, let's start off first and foremost with this resource update. This is only the second resource you've put out on this asset. The first resource came in at right around 7.3 million ounces, and now you're up just short of 9 million ounces. And as I mentioned, there's almost 8 million ounces in the measured and indicated category here. Give us a quick little overview of the changes. What was updated in terms of this resource?
Sure. So, I mean, we just about doubled our drilling in 2024. It was a big season on Valley. We drilled around 25,000 meters, and that was a mix of infill and step outs, and there were even holes that were both, starting up in kind of the core of the system and drilling out into edges where we knew the mineralization was open and extending things out. So, yeah, really nice to see it come together the way it did. And so, we added a significant amount of ounces on the outside, but we also, as you mentioned, upgraded a lot. I mean, the measured and indicated in this resource is larger in terms of the total ounces than the indicated and inferred last time. So we've added indicated ounces that weren't even part of the model last time around. So that's a really nice conversion. And critically, I think, in looking at the May 15th release of the resource, you can see how it compares to the old model. We've had just very, very strong conversion from that old model to the current, and almost one-to-one transition from inferred and indicated into measured and inferred. So that's been fantastic to see. If you apply the same constraints, like the same physical pit shell, the same cutoff grade. The cutoff grade did come down just based on the higher gold price used. It's $2,350 here versus the $1,800 last year, and we're $1,000 just about above that lately. And obviously, stronger gold prices make those margins more economical. But applying those same constraints to the current block model with basically twice as much drill data, the total contained ounces varies by within 1%. So it's really consistent. It's almost what you see in grade control drilling as you mine a deposit, as opposed to the usual transition from inferred to measured and indicated. So, of course, we would have loved to have seen, a 50% increase in the total number of ounces in the infill drilling, but more often than not in this industry, you see, the 50% decrease. So to go one-to-one is definitely a win at this stage in the game. And then to have fleshed out more of the mineralization along the edges, it's still open. There's still more to chase. But for at least, present day, we found the value driver here. And we're excited to keep exploring right on the edges, but also stepping out into other parts of the intrusion where there's some interesting sniffs of some of this high-grade hotspot mineralization. And we'll see if we can find something else like it within the Valley intrusion, and of course, looking out regionally as well.
Now, just looking at some of the figures from that news release, figure 1, figure 2 breaks down this resource, the proposed pit shell here. And one thing that has always stood out about this resource is the high grade is even closer to surface. It pretty much runs to surface, and it looks from those figures pretty well defined, almost right in the middle of the pit. Talk to us about, again, that consistency of the high grade right by surface.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can just see within the drill holes, even drill holes with different orientation. When you get into the high grade, you just stay in the high grade. So these figures have the individual assays colored out on each one, and yeah, that high grade zone just has very little lower grade material within it, and that's in cross section and long section, just again various orientations, very consistent mineralization. So that's what's allowed us to do so much on relatively little. You see big and really really exciting orogenic deposits out there, but they need structurally controlled things where you're dealing with like a planar geometry, and maybe along that planar geometry even just one-dimensional features to an extent that you're chasing, and it takes a lot. It takes hundreds of thousands of meters even just to get to a resource estimate, sometimes even a million plus, and so to do all this on just over 50,000 meters, that's because of the high grade near surface, but critically, that's because of that consistency. And so that's allowed us to come very far, very fast. And the advantages don't stop at this stage of having consistent mineralization. That's something very favorable when it comes to mining of a deposit like this. Grade control, well-behaved ore goes a long way. And even when you look ahead towards, for more advanced studies, things like a pre-feasibility study and a feasibility study, you can't use inferred for those levels of studies, which are critical steps along the path towards production. You have to use measured and indicated. And as you mentioned, the vast majority of this deposit, and really all of the high grade, is in measured and indicated. And so it's not like, if when we push for the pre-feasibility study, it's not like we need to double down and get ready to dilute our shareholders and drill hundreds of thousands more meters to try to upgrade everything with that risk of, it's going to drop by 50%. No, like that's already done. We just got that step for free. So it's that consistency is wonderful.
Okay, before we get into the exploration, still the growth potential here, I was going to ask you, maybe follow up on what you were just mentioning there, where 40% of that measured and indicated, which is 7.94 million ounces, that's already classified as measured. So how much more drilling are you going to do? Is that going to be a priority to continue to upgrade those ounces that are already in the M&I, but actually in the in the indicated category?
At this stage, that's not a huge priority for us. That's pretty good information to go on, and especially seeing the consistency from when things were inferred into measured and indicated. That itself is pretty telling that this is well-behaved mineralization. We don't expect to see much in terms of surprises, and so we're comfortable with that and then pushing ahead. We don't necessarily need to get everything measured at this stage. There's plenty of information to go on and plenty of confidence in the model. That's really what has the biggest change here from the last of this one. Yes, we added a lot of ounces, but really the confidence here is where it needs to be for quite a while in terms of driving this ahead towards production. So that's really exciting to see. And in terms of looking at all those overall numbers, you actually have to do a bit of sleuthing. But I mentioned figure 4, and you can see that the initial pit shell constraint there, and you can see just visually that it's quite similar. We have a better understanding, we have a better density of information throughout. But if you look at table 2 in that news release, again, this is the May 15th release, you can see a variety of different cutoff grades. There were in the initial resource estimate from June of 2024, there were about 4.1 million ounces indicated and another 3.3 inferred, and the average grade between those categories was, like, for the global resource there, was about 1.45 grams per ton. And at first glance, it kind of looks like, oh, their grades went down. Just in terms of looking at the total M&I measured and indicated right now at 1.21, but really, again, just calling to mind figure 4, it's very similar to what it was. That you can look at these higher cutoff grades, and you basically, because of the better economics around the higher gold price, you bring in this lower grade material. Of course, the average grade is going to drop, but if you look at the cutoff grades up near the top of the chart, the 0.5 and the 0.6, so you kind of have to dig through the chart on this one, but the total measured and indicated resources in each of those rows, in 0.5, you can see 1.41, 7.4 million ounces, 1.41 grams per ton, and measured and indicated at 0.6, 1.5 grams per ton, 7.1 million ounces. So if you linearly extrapolate between those two, you come very close to that initial resource. So it's still sitting in there. It's just that things have gotten bigger. We're exploring into the broad areas that are outside of this hotspot of these exceptionally high grades. We're still seeing some good grades as we step out, but yeah, we're just tacking more and more onto this deposit.
Okay, let's talk about some of the near mine or near resource expansion opportunities. The news release mentions that the resource remains open to expansion along multiple limits of current drill testing, with potential for additional higher grade gold zones outside the current resource as indicated by late 2024 drilling. What does that mean? Where do you see the biggest potential to add ounces, and more importantly, high grade ounces?
I think the bigger potential, well, definitely the bigger potential for higher grade ounces at this point is sniffing around in other parts of the intrusion that just weren't on our radar really before. And the team made an excellent observation, excellent call last year and went and drilled hole 115, a bit of a wildcat in terms of, just recognizing a different vein orientation up on the ridge to the northwest of the deposit. And went to go drill that vein orientation where it was headed and got into some decent grades. There was about 100 meters of 0.5. And within that, I don't have the exact numbers in my head, but it was around 15 meters of 2 grams per ton. And that was around a dike of this porphyritic phase of the intrusion. And critically, that porphyritic phase of the intrusion is sitting right below our high grade zone with a whole bunch of fluid injected from that into the surrounding rock and basically forming our deposit. So we think that that phase is very important in terms of forming these. And so seeing it elsewhere in the valley intrusion makes us realize, oh, there are huge volumes of this intrusion that we just haven't tested yet at all. And it makes sense to kind of do a big pass here, especially around the area of 115, but in other areas as well. Just let's put some drill steel into here and just get a better sense of what this looks like. And we'll also be doing some geotechnical drilling this year that does some of that for us. We'll be drilling things that we don't think are too interesting, and we probably wouldn't otherwise drill, but nonetheless now we get a look at what's there, and we'll get assays on what's there. So that's an important part of accelerating the project, and we don't expect much from those holes, but we do get a look at all these different areas. And we are pretty excited about just the idea of these other hotspots out there, the evidence from hole 115. It could just be, and I think we talked about this before, but it could just be, dikes cutting through other parts of the system, but still, that could carry enough grade to maybe not have a huge effect on the present value of the deposit, but in terms of the lifespan of a longer mine out there, those could have impacts down the road if you're finding mineralization that just goes on and on beyond the initial mine plan. So that's encouraging. But again, we also don't know that this is the only spot that this mineralizing porphyritic phase, if that's what it is, has accumulated. So yeah, we're keen to test for that. And as far as the open edges of the deposit itself that you mentioned, we are dedicating some drilling to that, but that's sort of the, definitely decreasing in the priority versus the advancement of what we already know to be there versus the exploratory testing of other parts of the system, of the valley intrusion, and the regional exploration as well.
Okay, let's go into that. That 30,000 meter program announced May 20th. It has started. 5 drill rigs, 20,000 meters of that is dedicated to that valley zone and valley deposit, as you said, some of it even geotechnical work, but also some of it upgrading and expanding on the resource. And then 10,000 meters for this first pass drilling, more exploration. It says on at least 5 additional targets across a few of your projects, Rogue, Cynthia, and Einarson. Talk to us about this year's drill program, I guess even more so the exploration component of it.
Yeah, that 10,000 meters. And like I say, the lower priority bin here is the kind of the direct expansion of those open areas. Not to say that we're not intrigued by those open edges, but just, where they factor into the value of the project in terms of adding ounces at the end of a long mine life versus, finding a new deposit or finding a new hotspot like the high grade zone of the valley. We would obviously rather do the latter there. And so in terms of the regional drilling, we will have a general focus on these reduced intrusion style systems, these valley-like targets. The Rogue Plutonic Complex is a 30 by 60 kilometer cluster. Cynthia is sort of a little lobe coming off the bottom of that, which is, for most intents and purposes, the same as the Rogue Intrusive Complex. So yeah, a lot of testing there, looking for these types of deposits. We're still excited by what we're seeing at Jupiter. We're not going to spend a ton of, and so that's an orogenic target on the Einarson project to the north, and that was the first target that we drilled and the first discovery that we made out there. We're drilling just a few holes, and that will actually be starting fairly soon, taking some bigger swings on it and just kind of looking at the broader footprint and trying to just sketch in a picture there of what that could be. It's already fairly large. We have it mineralization traced over, I think it's around 1.3 or 1.4 kilometers in terms of intersections in drilling to date. We haven't really established even the width of it. We have no idea on the depth. And so, taking some of those swings on width, depth, and some bigger step outs along the strike of it as well. But just a sort of a quicker look, and we may drill 1 or 2 other targets on the Einarson project with some phase 1 programs. But for the most part, yeah, we're going to be looking at other intrusions. We'll be getting back out to Gracie this year, being excited to follow that up for a while now. We've seen basically the same veins that you see at Valley but outside of the intrusion. Like when you drill from the mineralized part of the intrusion out into the surrounding country rock, the veins are still there. The density of them drops off, and so the veins are what's carrying the gold. And we see those that same alteration at Gracie, the same veins, the same visible gold in those veins with the same mineral associations. So we know there's another system there. We don't know yet that it's anything like Valley in terms of its scale and intensity, but certainly the geochemical footprint's very big. There's been a lot of fluid through there. We don't have any reason to suspect it's not like Valley. So it's an exciting target for us. But there are others too. We're still finding new systems basically outcropping on surface. And, we'll be advancing some of those towards that potential drilling this season as well. And yeah, other targets on the list. It's a fairly target-rich environment, and in addition to the drilling, we'll have more mag being flown. That's really good for picking out where these things are. We'll have our teams out there just combing around again, and we still found exposed, reduced intrusion related gold systems sitting on surface, or basically just mineralized intrusions sitting on surface that hadn't been documented, hadn't been discovered even last year, and that was our fourth field season out there, and we're still stumbling across new ones. So if that push continues, we may still find more mineralization outcropping on surface, just given the amount of ground we have left to cover. So it's it's going to be an exciting year in the regional exploration, and yeah, complemented by a push towards future studies. We have a VP engineering just joining us next month, Victor Vidovin. Really happy to have him on board with the company. Brings a lot of highly relevant experience and a lot of drive to help us advance this as well. So, and we're building out that team further, and want to bring this project ahead, as back speaking of Valley specifically, as efficiently as we can.
Okay. So again, another big season of work. One other news event that is coming up that was mentioned in that updated resource news release is PEA. You're going to be putting economics around this asset. When can we expect that?
I think the language was in the coming weeks, something like that, and kept intentionally vague just to give ourselves some leeway in terms of making sure that all ducks are aligned, and you can never quite predict what the ducks are going to do in the final stages. But yeah, just making sure that we've gone over things with a fine-tooth comb, that it all comes together well, that it all makes sense, that everything's realistic, and yeah, but it's coming together quickly. It's great to see. We're looking forward to having that out there, to having those final numbers just in hand, but also out and something that we can talk about versus just pointing to the number of ounces all the time, because of course there are there's a huge spectrum of quality when it comes to gold ounces, and obviously we talk about the quality of Valley quite a bit, but it'll be nice to be able to quantify that to a good extent and talk about what's the value we're actually looking at here.
Okay, Scott, let's take a step back here and just talk about what you're hearing from shareholders, from other large companies. So look, this is clearly a world-class resource. You're already almost at 9 million ounces of high-grade open pit resources here. You have a large mining companies already in the stock, but what can you tell us about how the market is taking this more from the development and larger company standpoint?
Yeah, it's obviously a noteworthy deposit, as you mentioned, and it's something that is obviously impactful for Snowline in an all-encompassing way. But it's a big enough deposit to be impactful in pretty much any portfolio. And it's interesting to see the focus on quality, on scale. I forget who it was who said it, but if you're going to permit a mine, permitting a 50,000 ounce producer is almost just as arduous as permitting, a million ounce producer. And so you might as well go big. Not to say that, not trying to paint a production profile for Valley, but it's obviously a big deposit and obviously a high quality deposit. So, it's certainly something we're lucky to have and something we're keen to push ahead with.
All right, Scott, thank you very much for taking time to share with us, update us on that updated resource and this 30,000 meter drill program. For everyone listening, if you have any follow-up questions for Scott, please keep those emails coming to me and I'll be able to bring those up in future calls as we recap the upcoming PEA and drill results when they start trickling out to the market. Again, I've been chatting with Scott Berdahl, CEO of Snowline Gold. Scott, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Boy. Appreciate it.